Greetings, traveler. Sometimes, as game designers, we have to create not just the abilities and story in games, we also have to create levels. And this falls into an entire category of design called level design. But what exactly is level design and how can we approach it in a methodic, structured way? So, today, what I want to talk about is the hard way of doing level design, trying to sort of do everything at once. And then I want to share my method of doing level design in a way that's easy to start, easy to progress in. Hopefully, it's as creative as possible and as fun as possible. And most importantly, it's testable. So we know that whatever we end up with is something the players will enjoy. If you don't know who I am, my name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 14 years now. I've worked on games like Star Ocean, FIFA, Rage of Bahamut, and so many more. So something that always struck me as weird with the way that most people in my experience approach level design is the biggest trap ever, where level design sort of happens in such a way where we simply copy what other games do and say, well, if those games are doing it and they're successful, surely we can benefit from the same. In my experience, that's problematic because we inherit all of the design choices of those games without necessarily serving them or them serving our game. So that just gets us into unnecessary complexity, basically. The other difficult part of doing level design is trying to approach it from beautiful or artistic perspective. Absolutely, there is a place for that, but if we start from that place, then we're stuck having to explain artistic choices in the way the player uses the level. So perhaps artistically a tree should be in the middle of the level, while gameplay-wise it makes no sense or it makes the game no more enjoyable. So these are the two ways that I've identified where we make level design difficult for ourselves. And now what I want to introduce is my 3-step framework for approaching level design in a way that feels hopefully easier to do. And here, as an example, I have Total War Warhammer 3, one of the skirmishes versus the AI. If you don't know anything about this game, don't worry about it because we're not really going to talk about any of the game's mechanics. I just briefly want to show that in this game you have two armies fighting each other, so lots of units at the battlefield at once, anywhere from 100 to thousands. So here we're talking about armies moving against each other, right? So we have a wide area. I think having an even wider area would be more interesting. But what do armies do? What sort of interesting situations do armies find themselves in? Well, they have to be able to do their formations in true medieval combat style or fantasy combat style. Another interesting thing to do is to be able to hide your army, whether it is behind this hill here, so the army on the other side cannot see you right away, or perhaps you want to hide the army in the forest until later on when you get to use it. So in this game, if you put a unit in this foresty area, you get this little icon here, this eye, that tells that this unit is hidden. So it allows those sort of techniques, and many, many more in this game where some units might be archers, so you might want to put your archer units behind your front line, your guard, and so on. So why do I mention this game in particular? Well, there's nothing special about this game level design wise. I just want to show off that if you think about what the units and what the player needs to do first, then everything else that's in this level sort of is self-explanatory. So if you want the units to be able to do extravagant formations, so a big front line with cavalry on the sides and archers in the back, or artillery in the back, you need a lot of space. So this level provides a lot of space. If you want to hide units, this level provides a couple of ways for you to hide units. So this sort of gives you a hint of not going 100% with beautiful terrain first. Instead, finding what player actions are important and then making level design serve those player actions. And that's the approach that makes level design easy for us. So in my way of approaching level design, of course, level design is a huge topic, right? And there's so many games out there that do it really, really well. But my way of approaching it is in 3 steps. First, examining what player actions we want to have at the foreground of our level design. So if the player needs to hide, the player must have a place to hide in. So you see this also in cover-based shooter games. They wouldn't really be possible without the cover to hide behind. So somewhere in there must be cover. Other things might be mining for resources. So of course you're going to need the areas to mine for resources for. Other actions might be, for example, if in the game it's possible to walk on walls and do these acrobatic fighting maneuvers against the enemy. If your player character is a ninja or a warrior or something, then providing these walls will put in the level the elements necessary to perform these acrobatic maneuvers. And by now you get the pattern here. So there's nothing inherently good or bad about the design of a level, but when you approach it from a player action perspective, it sort of becomes self-explanatory. So the first step in this framework is defining player actions. The player hides, the player mines, the player can jump off walls, the player can hang upside down from the ceiling, or the player can take cover. All these player actions that are hopefully defined earlier on in your game design process and in the game design document before we even get to do any level design whatsoever, are really our guide in the situation. And then in the second step of this framework is where we get to have the most fun. So we already saw a quick example with hiding. So hiding can mean you can hide behind a hill, you can hide inside the forest. But what if we have different types of hiding in our game? What if this wizard character here can cast a smoke spell all over this area, and for, let's say, 5 minutes, anybody who's inside the smoke can also hide. Now, of course, the enemy will see this smoke and will think, is somebody hiding in there, or is it just a distraction? So here the enemy will have to take the gamble of either ignoring the smoke and going for the units he can see, or calling our bluff and basically sending maybe a unit of cavalry to check inside the smoke to see if there's any archers or other vulnerable units in there. So that's another creative way of hiding. Perhaps it's possible for units to dig in the ground and hide underground for some time, or perhaps like it's possible in this game, there's units that are always hidden unless an enemy goes really, really close to them to check out if they're really there. Perhaps that's another possibility. So here, really, the sky is the limit. It depends on what sort of game we're talking about. Is it sci-fi or fantasy or realistic or historical, which will determine what sort of environment and abilities are possible. But once you create the actions possible in step 1, then step 2 becomes so much easier and so much fun to do. So if your game, for example, has a mechanic where perhaps your character is a ninja and your ninja can throw kunais at the wall and perhaps climb the wall, and you want to have this as a fun feature for enabling exploration or letting yourself get out of a difficult situation in the game, then we already have our work cut out for us. We will need the wall or the surface that can accept these kunais, and of course we need to do the logistics of making sure the player has enough of them or can retrieve or craft enough of them to make a whole ladder. So that's step 2 taken care of, basically. the actions that we describe in step 1 dictate what has to be there in level design. Of course, it's not that only these things can be there and there's no space for an artistic touch, or you cannot have any other elements, or you cannot have elements that are not directly involved with gameplay. But in my experience, as long as you cover these functional parts of the level where gameplay is served first and foremost, then it's way harder to go wrong in the subsequent steps. Now for step 3, of course, after we have fun with this part and we're creative in our level design approach and we create all these elements for the player to enjoy and use in the level, we still have to do the most important part, which is test. So in the third step, of course we will test ourselves to see if the elements we put in the level to serve the player actions from step 1 indeed do so. So for example, if we added cover in the level, but the cover we put in the level is in the wrong place, or the cover is not high enough to completely conceal the player, then we have some adjusting to do. Or if we go with the example of the ninja throwing kunais to climb a wall, then if the wall is too tall and the player doesn't have enough kunais, of course, that's something we need to adjust as well. But this is a very simple test that we can do ourselves to make sure that at the base level, the elements we added in the level serve the mechanics and the actions the player will take. So this is a very straightforward part of the test. However, the most important part of the test happens with other people. And the way I like to approach this is, after I've put all the elements that I believe the players will enjoy in the level and I believe will serve gameplay, we have to test this with other people, ideally without telling them about every single element in the level. So to give you a visual example, if we were talking about a level we designed for Total War here, and our intention with placing, let's say, this patch of forest here was for players to use it to hide, then we would ask players to just play a few games in this level, and then as players are playing, 5, 10, 20 games in this level, we would see how many of them actually used this forest for hiding, or actually used this this hill here to hide behind. And of course, we don't have to limit ourselves to that. We can go way beyond that. Perhaps there is this archer unit that would benefit from being on the high ground. So we have this high ground up here compared to the rest of the level here. So we would check to see from those 10, 20 games, how many people actually placed archers up here. So if through all the games, nobody placed archers up here, then we would start wondering if this element serves the purpose that we had in mind. If some people hid units behind this hill here, but didn't place any archers up here, we would think that, okay, the hiding aspect of the level is fulfilled, while the high ground aspect perhaps is not so easy to use. And if players finally used both of these elements and the forest and the full size of the map to maneuver cavalry around here and I don't know, do some interesting side skirmishes here on the sides, then we would think that, yeah, this level really serves gameplay in the fullest form. And of course, it doesn't have to be that every single game uses every single of these elements, right? But when we set out to design this level, we have some expectations in mind. So for example, if the player is capable of hiding, perhaps in half of the games, he will use these elements to hide. So that's a 50% expectation. So if we see players using it 90% of the time, it's way above our expectation. If it's never used, then it's way below our expectation. And this gives us the feedback we need to think about whether we want to adjust in the future. So basically that concludes the third step of the framework. So to recap, in the first part of this framework, we ask what sort of actions do we want the player to do, or did we design the player to be able to do? So in this example, hiding, using the high ground. In other examples, hiding behind covers and shooting, climbing walls, doing acrobatics, mining for resources, hiding in smoke. Any of the actions that we want the player, we actively want the player to be able to use, we make a list of, and then we move on to step 2. In step 2, we pick all of the actions that we want usable in this level that should exist in a game level for the player to be able to fully use and enjoy his abilities, and we creatively add them in the level in as many ways as we want. And of course, with this step or after this step, any sort of artistic input is welcome. So Total War approaches this in the way where the same level can look several different ways. So this is the let's say, I don't know, spring perhaps, weather mode of the level. There is a snowy version and there is a rainy version and so on. But because there can be different types of corruption in this level, there can be a chaos version with lava on the sides, or there can be a dark elf version with perhaps all the trees burned. I don't know, there's many possibilities here. But even though the level looks different, the mechanics of the level are not changed in this game. So this hill is still going to be here, this foresty area is still going to be here, and so on. So this gives a lot of artistic variation to the level, even though the base mechanics are still the same. Anyway, and in step 3, we first test ourselves to make sure that these features indeed behave as we want them to. And more crucially, we test with other people, ideally without telling them what we're testing. So we're just asking them to play the game and see if the elements we placed in the level give the player the hint that if they use this element, they should be getting the expected benefit. So for example, if you have an army and you see a forest in the level, it sort of follows logic that if the army was in the forest entirely, then, or this single character, if he was in the forest like this or like this, then, well, we can't even visually see him, so we would expect the enemy to not be able to see him as well. So once we run several tests with other people and we observe the results and hopefully record them too, then we can have a very straightforward statistical feedback for whether the level behaves as we intended to, as it was designed to behave. And from that feedback, we can choose to adjust or continue with the development of the game. Anyway, that's it for today. I know this is a tricky topic, and once we get into level design, there's all these ideas and examples from other game, and oh, I played that game and its level design was amazing. I found that limiting the conversation to actionable items is serving game development more than saying, oh, I played that game and it was fun. The more we get close to vague concepts like that, the more difficult conversation becomes. So if we say, hey, let's make this level fun, or let's make it interesting, or let's make it explorable, these things could mean 1,000 different implementations. But if we say, for example, let's say that one unit in this game takes the space of, I don't know, for example, 20 by 20 meters, and we want 20 units present at a time, then this can give us a rough estimation for how big the level needs to be able to field all the units and leave enough space for maneuvering and for formations and so on. So that way of thinking about it gives us actionable steps, which are great to have in game design, I think. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope this helps at least one other person out there. I hope you have a good time employing these techniques, and let me know how they work for you. And as always, have fun.